how's it going? I'm Danny Pudi. I just talked to Kara. We had a really good time. I tried not to be self-conscious and stare at my hair or my face. For the most part, it worked out. Anyways, I had a really fun time and just talking about life.
Hi friends, welcome back to Really Famous. I'm Kara, and right now you're about to get to know Danny Pudi on another level. We get super personal, and you're gonna love him. Let's do it. Your mother's
Yeah.
Polish, and your
Yep.
father's Indian, and they met
Yep.
in ESL class. Is that true?
They did. So I was part of the story is that both my parents are immigrated to America, to Chicago specifically in the 1970s. And yes, my mother was born in Poland. My father was born in India, and they met at this YMCA where both of them were taking classes. They didn't meet in the actual class, but they were both taking ESL
Okay.
classes. And it was fun because the part of this story was me asking questions, specific questions about how they met and how they got together, things that I actually never knew. So during this process, I actually learned that they met in the library at the YMCA while they were both studying and learning English. So it was kind of a fun way to kind of like just learn more about my family, but also it started really because I didn't have a lot of answers to how my family kind of came to be. I didn't grow up with my father, and I reconnected with him later in my life. And just because of that, I realized there was a lot of things I just didn't know about him or my parents or my own childhood, just because I never really asked.
Okay, that's so interesting. So I do feel
Yeah.
like, right, I'm just going to give you a little disclaimer. So I used to be a
Sure.
therapist before I did this.
Okay.
So I'm very interested in like the human experience and family
Yeah.
and all of that. So this is
Cool.
interesting to me. So you grew
Great.
up with your mom, but where was your
Yeah.
dad? So was he kind of absent, or did you see him from time to time? Like, what was that like?
So yeah, that was part of the interesting thing about exploring this story. So I always knew my dad was somewhere. I did actually never knew really where he was exactly. He lived in Chicago, in a different neighborhood. My parents separated when I was about 2 years old, and I saw him a handful of times when I was a child, just a couple of times. And I really didn't actually have any kind of relationship with him, other than maybe a couple times where we saw each other at some family gatherings and a couple phone calls. And so, not until I was much older, just recently, actually, over the past 5 years, did we actually reconnect. And a large part of that was because I became a father myself, and I decided it was the right time to figure things out. And so for most of my life, yeah, we didn't really have a relationship. I knew where he was, sort of. I knew he was in Chicago, but I didn't really have any kind of geographical awareness of where he was, and I didn't have any kind of predictable, I guess, meetings with him at all.
So what did your mother tell you about him? Did you have a certain story that you were raised with?
No, no, and so that
Oh,
was part of this. Is I never really grew up with anything. I never grew up with any kind of stories, good or bad. I just kind of it was just one of those things we didn't talk about. And I grew up with my mom, but she was a single mom, raising three kids, working two jobs, going to school. I mean, she's a force. She's amazing. So she wasn't really home a lot, and we just didn't talk about it. And I grew up actually with my grandparents from Poland, and so my childhood was spent like sitting at home, speaking Polish, going to Polish school, and we just it was almost kind of like a rule. We just didn't really communicate about my dad. But I'm clearly all very Indian, you know, and I knew that he was there somewhere, and I just always had this sort of like these questions in the back of my mind,
sure.
wondering like where he was and
Yeah.
what he was doing, and it was just something we just didn't really talk about.
So that's interesting. So do your siblings also, do they resemble your father? Like, do they look and feel Indian as well? Or is kind of a mishmash of who feels what?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I would have to ask them. I mean, I think we all, I mean, we definitely look more Indian probably than Polish, I would
Uh-huh.
say. And so that was something that was always interesting for me growing up, is that inside our house, I felt very much, I grew up culturally Polish and American, but then when I would step outside or go to school, I
Right.
was clearly presenting as something else. And that to me was interesting because there were no other Indian American families in my school or neighborhood really. And so that was always kind of like I guess, questions. And I had questions about my identity and a struggle for me growing up that I knew that when I would step outside, not that there were these expectations, but I always felt like I would be reminded of my father and my past and this whole other world that I just didn't really know much about. And it was almost like living two lives, you know?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I can't imagine what that was like. Did you talk to your siblings about it? Like, or was it totally nobody talked about anything related to
Nobody, no,
nobody?
we have a very special bond, but I think we all dealt with it in different ways, you
Sure.
know? My way of handling that sort of, living with, the absence of a father and, you know, dealing with these identity issues was always like performance and comedy and theater and like storytelling. And that way always was a place for me to kind of go and be like, I could step on stage and I could, put on whatever mask or costume and I could, find peace in that. And that was sort of where I realized growing up, I was like, oh, this is how I love doing this because part of it is processing. And it's just kind of like where my passion is to figure out who people are, but my sister and my brother, I think they dealt with it in their own ways. And I think not until we were a little bit older did we actually like start to be really kind of like talk about it more, and realize that each of us were, dealing with this in different ways. But I think just because of our house and our lives, we just didn't really communicate about it very much growing up. Not, and it's nice to kind of now have time to when we're growing up a little bit to be like, yeah, that was weird. Certain things
Yeah.
were really weird growing up. Yeah, yeah,
Well, you were kind of taught that it's not something to talk about. So why would you all talk about it? Because that's how you were raised. It's like this just isn't something we address.
yeah, yeah. And so there was no real map for that,
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the story that I was exploring too, is that I realized when my kids would ask me questions, like point blank,
Uh,
how they were very simple questions. They would ask me questions like, "Oh, like when's your dad's birthday?" And I'd be like, that's a good question. But then it would make me feel uncomfortable that I don't know my dad's birthday.
right.
And then I'd realize like, how come yeah, how do I explain this to my kids and what else is this unpacking within me? And then I would just be like a robot that's like, um, that's kind of like, fitting out. It's like, it's like what and just from a simple question, and I think that was like really kind of something really interesting to me is how much I didn't, how much I buried and how much I personally didn't deal with. That was just very like logical, simple questions,
Uh-huh.
and because we didn't talk about it, little things like
Yeah.
that. Hmm.
So that's so interesting. So it's definitely your kids then. You have twins, right?
I have twins, yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
it's definitely when they
yeah,
got to the age of being curious about those things that they would naturally be curious about. But obviously, if they're asking you questions point blank, then you aren't raising them in a similar way. Like, you know what I mean? So that just shows that they are being raised in a different kind of environment than you were. So that's interesting
yes,
too. Did you
yes.
consciously do that? Like, were
Oh,
you,
I
it
think
was
so.
more open?
I think a large part of that is that my wife, who was an educator, and I think her family is way they're I think they're better communicators in some ways. Or at least they grew up with a little bit more of that communication was um, at home. They talked more about certain things. Our family is different, and every family, right? And I think that is something that she's instilled in our children, and that openness, and that's just been really interesting to see how that's kind of now helped me open up, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
like helped my kids. And it's also interesting to see how you being surprised. I'm surprised more now about my own childhood, just because no one's really point blank asked me certain questions that are that your kids do. The kids. My daughter asked like, "How did your parents come to be divorced?" And it's just interesting when it comes from your children, because then you really have to be like, "Oh, whoa, I got to actually figure out how to tell this story to you." but it's tricky when I actually don't really know. And that was part of this
Right.
journey too, is like really trying to figure out that how much I haven't myself processed so much of this story. And and in many ways too, I think my own family and other people around me, the people who are close to me, they don't ask those questions because I think they know there's this sort of like place that we don't go,
Yeah.
and there's just a kind of a beautiful wonder with kids where they're just like, I just want to know. There's this, they just, and that, so it catches me off guard from time to time. But I
Right.
know it's good. It's for the best.
Yeah, so that's interesting too because I also feel like a lot of comedians or comedic actors, right, have that. That's part of what I don't know if it's a drive or whatever, where you can kind of remove yourself from
Yeah.
whatever immediate situation is. So I could see where that would help you as well, and it has been good for your career, whatever, to some degree. I'm sure that's not everything, but maybe it helps fuel it or whatever, like you said at the beginning. But I just want to go back for a second. So that makes me wonder
Yeah.
too. So because your wife grew up in a family that communicates and talks about things. So when you first got in a relationship with her, was it a weird change for you that she expected to talk about things and it was not something you were used to?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, which is great. It's great for me. I just realized how it's a whole side of me that I'm growing and learning and but yeah, I think you hit on all those things. Is that I grew up in performance and I grew up in a household, an immigrant household where it was just different. There was different priorities. There were other things that we were dealing with, and so to see things from my wife's perspective, it's been really wonderful to kind of be able to like see my life from a different point of view, and also know that there's like I don't know, there's just ways for me to help understand my own family story, um, just to get better as a communicator. I think that's been really helpful with her. But it's the same thing with my children. Like she'll ask questions that are direct, and sometimes I'll feel like like uh, they're like an attack,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
realize it's just a question. But it takes me a moment to be like, it's just a question. She just wants to know.
Right.
But I just didn't grow up like that. Questions weren't like a you just kind of didn't ask questions like that.
Yeah.
You kind of you didn't really, we didn't really talk about the past. And for good reason. I think, for a lot of people in my family, they went through things that were very hard and very difficult. And so I could almost feel that growing up, and I
Hmm.
didn't want to add to that stress. Um, but at the same time, now it's nice to be able to actually talk about it with someone, to be like, oh yeah, this was stuff that really was impactful in my life, and of course, then it impacts our relationship. And so I'm glad she pushes me, and she has continued to push me, and hopefully we can continue to do that with our kids. And but yeah, that's been a thing that I've been working on as a person, as a father, as a
Uh-huh.
husband. I wouldn't say it's entirely comfortable for me at all
Uh-huh.
times, but I it's a good challenge for me for sure.
Definitely. And that's good. I mean, it's good, I feel like, to be evolving and growing in these ways. Like, you don't have to do all your growing as a child. So it's interesting. You had like two
Uh,
possibilities, too, right? You could have just shut it down and been like, this is just not how I work, how I operate. Or like you're taking it as this is a healthy thing and I'm going to go there with her and with the kids and with myself. It's really a gift. It's like you're going through a growth spurt in a way.
thanks. I think so. I think it is, and I think it's interesting for a lot of my the way I process is, a lot of it has been through like character. I love characters. I love understanding how a character um, tick, like what makes them tick, what makes a person behave a certain way, what happened to a person that impacted their actions years later. So that's kind of how I approach things as an actor, and so it's been interesting for me as a person to dive into this story and have to sort of like kind of distance myself a little bit and be
Uh-huh.
like, hey, this isn't just acting. This is actually like your life too. Um, but at the same time, I realize how interested I am in finding things out and just as a person about like my dad or me and how important it was for me to actually just learn more about just some basic things about my father just to help understand him as a person, which I knew was really helpful to understand me and why I am like sometimes so bewildered as a father. And I think some of that is for me just kind of making sense of like why who I am today, um, as a father, as a husband, and why I chose to be an actor. How much of that I guess I was kind of like just pulling the strings of being like, how much of that was actually because of my childhood? Like, how much of that was based on
Right.
my parents and my upbringing? And in some ways, it's kind of like it was like an academic project in some ways, as
Okay.
well as like a healing project. I think both, but yeah.
So interesting. So when did you decide? So how, well, I guess the question really is, when did you meet up with him later? You said that you kind of reconnected with him as an adult. So what spurred that on?
So I kept putting it off. I realized I had some opportunities to meet up with him, but I just never felt ready. I just never felt ready, and or I made excuses why I wasn't ready. And um, but I think my children obviously were a tremendous help with that. Just realizing I didn't have a lot of answers to questions that I wanted to have myself. So it wasn't just their questions; it was my own questions as well. I wanted to learn more about him, and I think being a father helped, and I think also I guess the distance too. I live in LA, and my father lived in Chicago, and so there was a safety net there where I knew like, okay, the next time I go to Chicago, that's kind of how it first started. I
Oh,
was like,
okay.
I could meet with him safely and just feel what this is going to feel like. I waited a long time until I felt like I was properly armored. Once I had chosen a career, I was an actor, I had kids, I was married. I think I created enough armor around me where I felt like I could enter this situation, this unknown situation, and feel okay no matter what happens. I think I was surprised by that first meeting.
Hmm.
Left with more questions, more curious, and that kind of just led to more of a reconnection. But it was the curiosity. I think I've lived my whole life pretending I wasn't curious about it, or I didn't have questions
Oh.
about him, or wondering where he was. But I really did want to know,
Hmm.
like, what is up with this guy? Why is my family not talking about this whole section in our family history? And I just want to know. I just want to know more. And I think that curiosity also was part of it as well.
Okay, so what were you afraid of that you felt like the armor would protect you against? Did you have these scenarios in your head of what might happen or what you would find out?
Yes, yeah. It's interesting because we didn't talk about my dad much. I just didn't know what kind of person he would be or how I would feel in a room with him. And I think I harbored a lot of resentment. I felt like there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of that. And so, and in some ways I felt hurt. I felt hurt for myself, but also for my mom. I was very protective of her. And I didn't want all of a sudden, hurt my family by by jumping in the middle of this situation too. So there was all that. Um, but I guess not knowing how I would feel in the moment, like what that would be like, what he might say. I think there was just all these, this uncertainty, and so I was like, I just need to kind of just walk into a room unscripted and just kind of see what
Hmm.
happens. And for a start. And then after that, I was just like, great, now I got a list of questions we got to get some
Oh,
answers.
sweet. Nice, nice.
Yeah,
So I know
yeah,
it's obviously the whole film is about this, right? So the film is about you
yeah,
having these interviews. Am I right? I mean, I don't want to describe it incorrectly.
yeah. I think that's right. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so you're having these talks with
yeah,
him, you're asking him all these
yeah,
questions. So I don't want to boil it down to just one question, but what did you find out? I mean, I guess I am asking you that one question. So what did you find out, or
yeah.
what did you find out about why you didn't know anything about him and why he wasn't with you growing up?
I don't know if I ever got a real great answer, and I think
Oh.
that's what I found out is that I really wanted
Oh.
like specific answers, and thinking that I could make sense of this with just like a clear answer. And I think it's, I guess one of the lessons I learned was just to ask questions was um, very difficult for me. Just to ask questions about my childhood, about my parents. I realized how difficult that was for me, just to open up certain topics, and that to me felt like a win in some ways, just to be able to ask a question.
Okay.
But also, it was really hard, and it still is hard to not have answers to all the questions. So I don't think I ever really like pinpointed exactly all the reasons why my father left, or how our family came to be. But I felt a lot better being able to ask those questions and being able to now face the questions for my children, knowing that there might not be answers to all these questions. But I know at least some basic things. I know his birthday's June 3rd. I
Uh-huh.
could, there are things like that. I know, I learned some stories about when he came to America, what that was like. I know his one of his favorite movies. I know things like that now, which are just help build him more as a person versus just sort of this. It definitely humanized him more, which I
Mm-hmm.
think has been really helpful for me. And I think just kind of got rid of this sort of weird mystery that was in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
You know,
Plus, it gave you
that was helpful.
agency. Yeah, it gave you agency, like the feeling that you're not just, you have no control over anything either. Like, at least you can take the steps to ask these questions, even if you don't get the answers.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's really it. And yeah, because I think at first I was just like immobilized by any
Mm-hmm.
question about my dad, or just anything about him. I remember years ago. So I have a few moments, and some of these stories are in the film where I would hear about my dad, and it was just very rare. But like, there was a moment in my life where I ran into this professor at this, yeah, at this in this. I was taking the summer class, and one of the professors was like, "Hey, Pudi, your last name? Oh, I think I know your dad." And he's like, "Great guy. I worked with him in this thing, and my father worked in mental health,
Wow.
and they had worked together in this hospital in Chicago, and that had like never happened to me before. No one had ever, and it was just kind of like one of those moments where I remember just being like, I just don't know what to say. No one at that point had ever said they knew my dad. No one at that point had ever said my dad was a great guy. And no one ever told me what his work was. There was all these things that happened in this one quick conversation that like just shut me down.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of this. I had these flashes every once in a while growing up where things like that would happen, and I would be like, "Oh, whoa, okay." There's this thing that I haven't dealt with that at some point I feel like maybe I should.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but then I just was like, let's go do improv. Let's go do some
Right.
comedy. Ooh, that
Right.
feels so much better now.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll
Absolutely.
pretend I'm, Super Mario, and we'll, have a good time.
That's so. I'm so interested by the fact that he was in mental health. So
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
What do you
yeah.
do?
Well, so he worked in many capacities. He worked at this hospital called Illinois Masonic in Chicago, and I think they've actually changed their name to Advocate, I believe. I'm not really sure, but it's in this neighborhood called Lakeview, and he actually lived right around the corner from there, and he worked there for 30 years. And that was part of this story too, is that I ended up meeting a couple of his close coworkers and friends after he passed away, and that's when I really started to learn more about him. Really, actually, after he passed away, is because some of his close friends started to share stories with me about him,
Mm.
and that was really just fascinating. So, anyways, he worked as the unit concierge in this hospital. He worked as a transporter, as a mental health counselor for a while in this unit, and so he worked in for 30 years in this unit, dealing with mental health. So, yeah,
How interesting. Okay, so that
yeah.
definitely explains also how you love to go into improv. You're like, yeah, this is it for me. This was like, it must have felt so good and like so much easier to deal with. But then you could channel it too. So it is kind of the best of both in a way, right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, it's freeing. There's a free like, there's just it's liberating to be able to just go up on stage and build a character from the ground up. Just build a character, take things here and there, and just build this world and tell this story. and then just kind of throw it all away,
Yeah.
and then move on. There's something really freeing about that. But yeah, at the same time, as an actor, I'm always like fascinated by more and more. I love acting so much. It's my passion. And more, I'm just fascinated by how people behave the way they do, and, all the different layers that people have. And so it felt like I was ignoring, one of the biggest characters in my life, my whole life, which is my dad. And I never really dug into him as a person and who he was, because we didn't have those conversations as a kid sitting on the couch. We never had those kind of moments where you're like, oh, this is kind of who my father is, or this is one of his favorite quotes. I didn't have any of that kind of stuff. So I was
Mhm.
kind of like building up the layers of who he was, just to learn. And that was just fascinating for me. It really was.
Right. So I'm also interested too. Like, do you feel like part of his personality? People sometimes take after their parents a little bit, or one parent more than the other. Like, did you
Yeah.
discover, oh, this is somewhat in a way I'm learning more about this is my tendency, and it's kind of like him, or not? None of that at all.
A little bit. It's funny because I think in some ways actually the reverse happened, where I started seeing myself in my mom more,
Oh, interesting.
where I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I would start, because of this process too, I had started talking to my mom about it.
Oh.
You know, um, and I realized how much of my tendencies are like my mom's, like really like a lot of her, um, how she approaches things. I think both of us are very much like, I tend to dive into work. I love work. I love getting into a project, and that helps me um, process, but also gives me a place to go when I'm not really sure what to do. And I think my mom is like that too. She's always gardening. She's fixing things. She is. She's just an incredibly inspiring person. So she's always moving forward, and I think I've modeled a lot of what I do after her. And I guess I just never really connected as much of that
Yeah.
until now. So there's a lot of things like that, that I've found myself uh, seeing myself in my mom, but also seeing myself in my father too. When people will tell me that, and now some of his friends will say certain things, or they'll be like, one of the stories we actually explore in the film is that I'd never heard this story, but that my father had dreams, maybe, and I don't know how real they were, but he used to love to sing. He used to love movies, and you had dreams of him and a buddy had dreams of becoming actors, and that I'd never heard that story ever, and that to me was interesting, just to kind of reflect back on my own
Yeah.
life, because my mom didn't want to be an actor, but so I was like, was there something there that we
Right.
had a connection there that I just never knew, and that was somehow passed to me in a way? I don't know. So I'm still kind of thinking about those things now, and I know he's impacted my life in a lot of ways now, and it's just kind of fun to see all the different ways that maybe he has impacted me without me even knowing.
Right. And it's probably a really nice thing for your mom too to realize to see you relating to her more. Like she may have feared this all of your life that, what would happen when, Danny's going to have questions and he's going to eventually meet him maybe and
Yeah.
whatever, but then here it is, it actually brought you, maybe connected the two of you more rather than, which is so interesting, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. I mean, like, so she's actually in this film, which is, yeah, I think part of my fear with all of this was hurting my family. I had such a fear about that, and I still continue to have that fear, you know. So it was interesting because a couple of years ago, I think she was the first one when I was telling her I was meeting up with my dad and I want to write about this and kind of figure out this story. She was the first one who was like, I think it's time for you to tell your story.
Oh,
And
amazing.
I was so worried. I've always been worried that, like, am I going to hurt her? How is she going to feel about this? And it's just been interesting to me to see that she was like, go for it, do it.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful in this process, but it also made me realize, like, again, like how much I think, just by not asking, I was not asking, not talking about it, I had built up this idea of what she might say and how she might feel, and maybe that wasn't totally true.
Yeah. I think the more you
Yeah.
have, when I say you, I mean people in general, not just you. When we have conversations in our head and we kind of are working through scenarios and assuming that the more we get deeper into something that's often not true at all. Like we build this narrative about how somebody
Yeah.
else feels or what somebody else is thinking, and it's really not at all what they're, what how they really feel or what they're really thinking. So it doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me that you thought this one way, and then here she
And
is
that's
surprising
me.
you.
That's like totally me. Like, I'll give you an example recently of my wife and I and how we differ. I'll build up this whole story in my head about why I should or shouldn't do something. And we were at a Krispy Kreme donut, and my daughter wanted a donut, right? So we go to a Krispy Kreme donut, and we're watching all the donuts on the track. This is actually in Times Square, and we're
Yeah,
watching
where
all the
they
donuts on
glaze
the
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
where they glaze them, and it's amazing. We're watching the donuts, and we're seeing like the sugar waterfall, and it's amazing. And then we see the donuts in the case, right? And my daughter goes up to ask for a donut, and they immediately go to grab a donut in the case, right? And um, and I was going to be kind of cool with that, but my wife had mentioned like maybe what about one of the ones on the that are fresh that are right there, right? And then I was like, I'm gonna ask for one of those donuts, right? I'm just gonna do this, right? And I'm like, excuse me, is it possible for my daughter, to grab a donut, a fresh donut that's like on the donut trail? And thinking that like this is going to end terribly. They're going to be like, those are untouchable. You have to get the ones in the case. That's actually for the performance, the donut show, or for the exclusive members of the Krispy Kreme club, whatever it is.
Right.
And the employee was like, sure, just grab the donut off and give it to my daughter. And she's like, sweet. And I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like a warrior. I felt like a champion. And to my wife, that would have been like, well, you could just do that. You could just ask
Right.
questions like that. If she says no, fine. But I think that's what it takes for me sometimes, is a nudge, and it takes. I don't like to disrupt too much,
Yeah, yeah.
But that was one of those moments where like, oh, it's good to be like have a healthy nudge, and I'm just like so thankful I have that in my
Right.
life.
I
Yeah.
think also it's interesting because without that, they also say like you get what you ask for in life, right? So that's
Hmm.
a small example, but it's a perfect example, right? If you didn't ask for it, she would have never gotten that donut, but you
She
just
would have never
did,
gotten
and
it.
it's like right. But even on the larger level, if you don't ask for something for opportunity, you're probably not going to get it. But if you do, you may surprise yourself on what you get. So, but here you are with a career that's so successful, like, and you don't like to disrupt, you don't like to whatever, but that's I think that's a tricky act to get as far as you have without wanting to rock the boat. Or are you different at work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'm pretty selective about what I ask for
Okay.
sure. In my mind, I'm always like, I don't need to ask for that, or I don't need to push for that. That's unnecessary. Ooh, this one is worth it. So there's a little bit of that dance in my mind of,
Uh-huh.
is this worth the fight?
So
Yeah.
you're not one of those people who's constantly calling your agent like, "What have you got for me?" I mean, you have steady gigs, so you don't need to anyway. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they might tell you. Sometimes if I'm feeling like what's going on with the situation, I just feel anxious about it. But generally, no, I feel too guilty. I think I grew up feeling guilty about all these things. I still feel guilty about. Um, yeah, I'm uncomfortable with like fame. I'm uncomfortable with all these things, and I always feel like I wouldn't say I always feel like. Sometimes I feel like some of this stuff is just can go away at any moment, and I'm not deserving in some ways, and there's those elements there.
yeah,
I grew up Catholic. I grew up with a lot of these sort of like, I would say, traditional like elements of guilt in my
yeah.
in my life, and and being just very grateful and quiet. I think that to me is something I took from my grandparents growing up, is trying not to complain too much, trying to be
Hmm.
very grateful about certain things. Um, and yeah, and I could see that now in my everyday life,
Yeah.
when I'm like having this battle about a donut,
Right, right.
where sometimes I'm like, it's just a donut, just
Right,
ask
right.
Annie.
A small exercise is going to be really reap rewards though long term. That donut was the perfect little exercise for realizing, yes, I'm gonna actually say things or ask for things more often. So
Yes,
fame, you
yes,
said you're
yeah.
not comfortable with fame. So well, like, so people recognize you. I'm guessing, right? Is that like, is it people who recognize you all over? Is it the things that you get from being famous? Like, what is it about fame that makes you uncomfortable?
Mm. I don't know. I think it's I love um, I love being able to connect with people through art. I think that's like a gift that I didn't realize how rewarding it would feel. So that's something to me that is like just wonderful. So if I meet someone and they're like, "Hey, I saw this episode of Community,
Mm-hmm.
and me and my best friend are just like you and your best friend, and we connect with Troy and Abed, and we were going through this difficult time in school or with isolation, and you helped us get through it." And that to me feels like, oh wow, profound and wonderful and unexpected, and I feel just very, very grateful for that. But sometimes I do feel caught off guard when I'm just like recognized on the street with my kids or something. It's an unusual feeling, and I don't know how to handle it sometimes. And this is another thing my wife has helped me with, where people will say things like, "Oh, you look familiar," and I don't know what to say back. You know. And I think it's all part bundled with my childhood of like I don't want to feel special. I want but at the same time it is I guess I have to get better about it of recognizing that it's just part of my job. Is that I
Mm-hmm.
get to connect with people in their living rooms, and I think part of me is always just like. How do I handle that? I don't know, especially with my kids. I don't know how to make it normal.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to feel like this is normal. Um, and so I usually, it's just me building up this story in my head of like, how do I behave in this situation? I just want to make sure that, I'm doing the best to be kind and see people. But at the same time, it could be odd when you're just like, at the dentist and someone recognizes you and your mouth is open,
Yeah.
It's like,
They start asking you
it's like I'm
questions.
vulnerable. I'm
Right.
vulnerable right now. You know, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe people get comfortable with that eventually. I don't know. I don't know.
I
So
don't
it's
think
something uh,
Look, I can tell you, my show is really famous. So I've interviewed a lot of famous people, and I can tell you that by and large, I don't know many people who have gotten comfortable with it. I mean, some more than others, and I've heard from a lot of people like you where they appreciate the fact that it exists, or else they wouldn't be doing what they do, right? They wouldn't be able to.
mm,
But I don't really can't think of anybody who's purely comfortable with it. So, but on top of, I feel like for you too, because you don't like to, right? You want to be just right all the time. So it's like a
yes,
double. It's one
yes.
pressure on top of the other. So I could see where it would be super uncomfortable. I'm going to turn it to one of the things like that you like about it, which is not as profound as the example you just gave me, but so I was watching Community and I'm talking to my friend Josh Miley about it because Josh loves Community and he's just like,
Right.
the paintball episodes. So
Uh,
okay, that is such joy. So I watched one
mm,
last night. I watched the season one paintball episode with my son. And
yes. Oh,
I mean, just pure joy for both of us. So
yeah.
that feels good, right? That
Oh,
you know that
yeah.
people from your art are just dying, laughing, appreciative, right?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. I mean, I really feel, and so we actually, well, I'm glad you were able to connect over that and watch it. That's,
Yeah.
I would say, top three episodes of Community for me all time. That one, paintball
Oh, the
episode,
first one or that or
the first one, the
okay.
first one. Second one is amazing too, but the first one was just like I felt like our world was now like, what is even happening here? We're doing slow motion shots of me jumping off a wall. um, Justin Lin directed that episode, and I just remember him setting up the shot for me to like do this slow motion jump off a wall as I was shooting,
Yes.
and then I say, come with me if you don't want paint on your clothes. And I couldn't believe we were able to get away with it. I felt like we were getting away with something, and just seeing the technical aspect of the shots we were trying to create, within a comedy, an ensemble comedy, I was getting to live, like I just felt like a kid, I was like watching
Mm.
action movies, but also now being in an action movie, but at the same time laughing with friends, and it kind of was hitting all those spots. So I watched Community with my kids. All this being said, I was watching Community with my
Oh,
kids for the first time over the pandemic as well, and it was
oh,
just wonderful. And I hadn't seen it in a long time to watch it through their eyes this time too, and to be able to relive some of those moments um, and see how excited they got in some of these moments. It was like it felt really really special. So yeah, I'm very very thankful for that, and to be able to share something like that with people, and truly feels like such a gift,
yeah.
especially right now, to just kind of bring some joy into people's lives for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so your kids, what did they like? Were they weirded out? Were they impressed? Did they look at you any differently when they were watching? Or did they kind of remove themselves from the fact that that's dad?
I think a lot of this is just truly based on how wonderful of a parent my wife is that they're not weirded out at all. They're just sort of like, oh yeah, that's dad. So what were you doing there? Okay, yeah. Okay, so then now let's go watch something else. Like, Dad, go make us some waffles. I think there's like it's very normal to them. It's kind
Uh-huh.
of what I do. I try to show them stuff. They've been on set. I show them pictures of being on set.
Uh,
You know,
oh, that's cool. Of them
you know,
on set when they were little, when they were
yeah.
babies?
So when they were babies, they were born in the middle of season 3 of Community, and so I have some photos of me bringing the babies to set and the cast members. We have this Halloween episode, and it's pretty great. There's a bunch of us. Where Donald and I are dressed as Calvin and Hobbes. There's like some other, yeah, and all of us are holding the baby when they're babies, and it's just like this odd photo of the kids, but it's beautiful, and I think it helped kind of like put perspective to my job, my work, the
Yeah.
show, who they are, and like and like for instance, the Russo brothers held our baby shower, who are the directors of Community, and so
Okay.
we're still very close as a group, and so I think it's normalized it. We go to Joel McHale's house quite a bit,
Okay. Still
and
or then?
he's still, yeah,
Still.
yeah,
What do you do
yeah.
there?
He's got a pool, which
Uh-huh.
which over the last year he's let us use his yard, and that was like a huge gift, and yeah, he's just that's been awesome for him, and his family has just been just wonderful about giving us like I don't know, just like another family. We've been to his house
Oh,
for New Year's a number of years, so I think we have this kind of like true set family that's kind of led into a real life family. So I think that makes this all not feel super unusual for them when they
right.
watch the show, because they know some of those people. They know the people personally,
Mm-hmm.
and it just kind of feels like we are just in our living room, like
Right.
we're doing a regular dance show. So it's been really cool to see
Yeah.
again. But also it's been funny rewatching episodes and being like, okay, this one's maybe not so appropriate for you, or this one is, or I realize I have to explain.
Right.
I gotta explain
Right.
this meta stuff here, which is they're growing up fast. They're growing up real fast.
Yes, but when you think about it, I think a lot of us watched TV shows that were a little bit too advanced for us with some of the content anyway. So it's like, hey, this is just kids have been doing this for a long time. But I know what you mean. Sometimes get into certain episodes with my kids. I'm like, maybe we'll just skip to the next one. I'll look at the beginning. I'll see at the top left where it'll say like, okay, what's some of the content warnings that I have to think about before?
Totally. We definitely had to skip the STD fair
Uh
episode. My
huh.
wife and I were like, oh, okay, let's skip that that one.
Right.
There's a few of them where we're like, yeah,
Right.
just not ready for their. I know they're going to ask questions. They're just incredibly inquisitive, both my children,
Uh,
and so they're going to ask, And
right.
I in my head I have to be like, okay, am I ready? Am I ready? No. So yeah, maybe in a couple of years they're still, not quite ready.
Yeah, yeah. So I put it on social media yesterday. I was like, just booked Danny, and any questions or whatever. So I did have a bunch of fan questions come in, but I am going to tell you just one reaction that I got, which was a lot of
Okay.
people were so appreciative of Abed and like just how you being on camera, representing him in that way. And people have such a warm feeling about him. And this really isn't even a question. I just wanted to say it, and I'm sure you've heard it a million times over, but that probably makes you feel pretty good, right? That you know that people really are appreciative and respond to him as a character.
Yes, yes. I think it meant so much to me to play Abed. I think Abed is just such a wonderful character, and to be able to play someone that is so unique and that hadn't been seen in television in many ways before, I took that very seriously, and I really wanted to make sure that I was doing the best I could to to make sure Abed was not a caricature in any ways
Hmm.
and wasn't taken for granted, and so to be able to connect with people and that it feels really really good, you know.
Cool,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
And I just want to touch on Mythic Quest too. So now you're
Hmm.
on Mythic Quest, and that's it's.
Yep.
So you did 2 seasons already. Is there a third season? Am I getting my facts wrong?
Yes.
Okay,
There we haven't started it yet, but yeah, we're about to start season 3 pretty soon here.
cool. So that feel. How does
Yeah.
that feel that you went from? Because I wonder too. After something like
Hmm.
Community, did you kind of worry like this is never going to happen again, or no? Like meaning,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
I don't want to put words in your
yeah,
mouth.
yeah. No, I think we knew something it was special. I think, I feel fortunate because I think we knew it was special when we were shooting it in many ways. So there was this sort of, and we were frequently almost canceled. So I think there was this idea
Right.
that like this this show's we're having a great time, but this is not going to last. So there was always
Hmm.
this feeling of like let's just go out with a bang and have as much fun as possible and be as creative and just see what happens, right? So that feeling like really kind of spilled into the show and the performances and how we were on set. It just felt like let's just see what else we could do here, because it really felt like we were doing something new and different and exciting. And I just knew sitting around that table with everyone around the table, it was just such an incredibly talented group that I couldn't believe I was sitting with this mix of each of them were just everybody around the table, just brilliant
Yeah.
people. And so yeah, there was this idea when it was ending many times that this is probably never going to happen again.
Hmm.
Which is like a bummer in some ways, but also kind of like, oh, like wow, cool that we got to do this thing,
Yeah.
So yeah, and then Mythic Quest came about actually because Megan Gans, who was a writer on Community, she wrote the bottle episode, for instance, in the first
Oh.
in Community, and she had contacted me about this role in Mythic Quest that she was like, I think you'll enjoy playing this character. It's not like Abed. He is very different. He's kind of a villain. He
Uh-huh.
is sort of this manipulator. And I was like, I'm in. This sounds amazing and exciting. And I love Megan, and I think she's just an incredibly talented writer. And it's the Always Sunny in Philadelphia team, and I've always loved their
Sure.
comedy and what they do. So I thought this would just be something really cool to dive into, and it's been that. It's been a wonderful experience. The ensemble is phenomenal. It's the same thing. It's like I'm not looking around a table this time. My character tends to be sort of this outsider, so I look at everybody usually through plexiglass or through these long
Oh,
walk and talks. But it's a wonderful ensemble,
right.
and it feels very special too within this group. And we were able to film during the pandemic, which also felt special because I felt like we were trying new things and creating. And I think a lot of that is because of Rob McElhaney and Megan Gans really, um, taking big risks during this time and being like, we have a pretty cool special bunch. And I think they have a lot of trust, and they put a lot of trust in their actors. So it's been really, really special.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thankful we get to go back soon and
For sure.
see what else happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Another shout out to another friend. I was talking to my friend Beth before we jumped on today, and she was like,
Okay.
my sons are upset. She's like, who are you talking to? I said, Danny Pudi. She said, oh, my sons are obsessed with Mythic Quest. So,
Oh, God.
yeah,
Yeah. Nice.
there you go. How do you feel when you're not working? Like, especially, I mean, with or without the pandemic, is that challenging for you as a creative person and somebody who wants everything to be just right?
Yeah, that's been a challenge for me always, I think,
Always.
is what do I do in my downtime? What do I do at downtime? You know, running ends up being a lot of it. I end up diving into that, running and reading and like trying to like, you know, try and find ways to be at peace as is really that's been a challenge for me. I'm also like I love people. I love being around people.
Hmm.
I feed off people's energy. I like that, and so that's it's definitely been a bit of a challenge for me over the last couple of years to not have that. I will say I've been fortunate because I've had work, creative work to dive into, and I just realized how valuable that is for me to be diving into a character, exploring a story. Storytelling for me is really um, it just feels very purposeful. It just always feels like, like I love diving into a story, and then that could be reading, or it could be literally working on a character, like in Mythic Quest, and um, so yeah, but yeah, it is
Yeah.
definitely challenging for me to rest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I get it. And
yeah,
as an actor, like that's just the nature of it, that you're going to have these periods where you're not working and you can
yeah,
go from like not 0 to 60, but 60 to 0 kind of,
yes, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. It's always tricky. I mean, I think I know it. I could feel when I'm like, okay, it's been like 3 or 4 weeks. I need to create something. I need to
Yeah.
create. I feel like that. I got to do something. So, that could be anything. It could literally be like, okay, I'm gonna go and I need to go like make a caramelized leek tart. I need to create something
Ooh, that
today.
sounds good.
Yeah, yeah, I just made one. It was really good. It was really good.
Oh,
I just found a recipe, but I think like I have this sort of like I got to do something. I got to, you
uh-huh.
know, and that helps me kind of like uh, in my everyday life. But I think a big part of it too is me running. I know if I run or if I get some exercise in the day, I
Hmm.
know that also is
Right.
like a brain bath. Feels really good.
Yeah, plus you're outdoors and there's studies that say like not only being physically active, but being active outdoors in nature. If you can get yourself into nature, that's like a really calming thing.
That's it. Trees. I like will look at
Yeah.
trees. I need to like just look at a tree and be like, that thing is there. The tree is still there. It's like, oh, that feels good.
It's grounding for you. Yes, I totally
Yes.
get it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh shoot, I just was gonna ask you something. I completely lost my train of thought. I'm gonna have to
Running.
skip it, I guess. Well,
Leek
it was
tart. I'll
something
send you
about
the recipe for the
leek.
tart.
Oh yeah,
The
send me
leek
the
tart.
recipe for the
Yeah.
leek tart. Your wife sounds amazing, and also I just want to jump back to the fact that I'm so interested in the fact that you chose her as a life partner
Mm,
because she is bringing out all these things in you that aren't necessarily your comfort zone and your
hmm
default, but they help you grow into who you're appreciating you're becoming, which is
mm,
that's a very interesting thing to know about yourself, like that you
mm.
opted into that instead of opting out. It's a healthy thing is what I'm trying to tell you.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, I like it's funny. I have a very vivid memory of our first meeting, my wife and I, and in it she's just sitting in a chair, very comfortably, and she's very quick to laugh and quick to smile. And in that, like, that's kind of like my memory of her right away is how grounded she was, and how that's just like a good feeling in me. And I think I knew right away. I was like, oh, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't. I want to be around that more. Like, it felt good. So, anyways, but I think it's kind of part of that where there's something intriguing about it, but also just feels
Hmm.
really good to be near her. It just does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And like I said, it's just
Hmm.
my therapy view, my therapist perspective is that that is a healthy thing that you sought that out. And even though, right, it's not your natural inclination, you saw it as a good thing for yourself and you're going with it, growing with it. So not shutting it down, the fact that
Mm.
she's teaching you how to be this way. So bravo for you and
Oh,
brava for her.
thanks for making me realize that. Again, these are things that I feel. Maybe I
Yeah.
can feel these things. I can't necessarily put them into words, but I think I feel that around her for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. How would you describe yourself?
So, I've been taking all these personality tests, like Enneagram and all those things. And I think Myers-Briggs. I think I did that one too, and I forget which one's which, but I did the one where I'm a 7. I think that's the Enneagram.
Yeah, the Myers Briggs is 4 letters, 4 initials.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like a campaigner. Is that right in there?
Oh no, I
ENFP or
think
something like
that's
that?
yeah, ENF. Are you an ENFP too? That's what I am.
Are you an ENFP? Oh,
Yes.
okay. So I'm gonna have to do a quick check here because I feel like I did that. That's called. Is there a name to that one?
That's the Myers-Briggs. Oh,
Okay.
are you saying that's what is there a name to the
Yeah. Was there a name to
ENFP?
that one?
I
Okay.
don't know. So it's funny because I was doing when I was a therapist. I remember I kind of did a little career coaching at the beginning of that, and that was my favorite tool. And I had like a mini version of it. I probably was not authorized to even conduct the test, and I probably didn't have the license for the test, or I didn't like that. But I was like, this thing is really cool. It's going to teach
Yeah.
people about themselves. So I would give it to them, and so I think I had the mini version. I don't even know, but now it's funny because it's become popular again, and that was years ago that I used that. But I do love that test. It's fun.
Uh,
You learn about
okay.
yourself.
You really do. So I'll probably have to tell you afterward when I find out what I was.
Okay.
That'll be a fun addition. But yeah, so in both of those though, it was elements and qualities that I kind of was like, oh, it helped us, my wife and I, be like, oh yeah, understand each other's, needs and
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. It really does help with that. So for sure, I am an extrovert. I love being around people. I love. I think with the seven, I'm like drawn to sort of new experiences and those kind of things. And I think in some ways my wife's a little bit more introverted, so it's kind of a nice balance,
Yeah.
But I think when I've been kind of looking through all these things, I've sort of realized how much I actually really also, I don't think I'm a full on extrovert. I think I am. There's some, I like to be alone a little bit
Mm-hmm.
too. And I think I've kind of realized that over time. I kind of like, after like being out and about and with people and new experiences, I really like a little bit of time to just kind of quiet and
Mm-hmm.
and that's been something interesting through this process too, to just realize like, oh, I actually really do like that. I like going for a run by myself. I like kind of going
Right.
on a trail run or being, in the woods or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so weird, but I do think you can be both. I remember when I
Hmm.
took it, I was on the fence. I was like maybe one or two answers away from being an INFP, so that's an introvert, right, versus
Okay.
extrovert, ENFP. But I think the same thing. So it's funny because as I get older, I find myself being more of an extrovert. I've always been
Mm.
an introvert in a way. Like I've always liked my alone time. I like to do things by myself. I'll go places. I'll travel by myself. I mean, I don't really do it anymore now with kids and my husband, but I
Yeah.
like to do things by myself. I like to be on my own, but at the same time I love being with people. So I think you can be both. I think they're just two sides of it and
I
they can
totally agree.
coexist. Yep, yep.
I agree. I like nothing more than traveling than going eating alone at a restaurant. Love it.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's the
and
best.
I think it's a little bit of that. That feels like really good to me, like being in a new place, but also being by myself with a book, in a
Yes.
cozy little place. That feels really nice. Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Mhm.
so you would describe yourself as all of those things. I think that's good. That's plenty what you said. And then how do you think your wife would describe you? Remind me what her name is again?
Bridget.
Bridget. Okay, so how would
Bridget.
Bridget describe you?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Danger, Daniel. I think she would say, yeah, I'm gregarious. She definitely, like, she'll be like, you're a seven. You love new adventure. You love travel. I love travel. Um, I think I'm drawn to sort of uncomfortable new experiences. I'm okay with being like, let's get on a flight and go here, and then like take, go to a different time zone, and then, where I'm probably, I think she would say in some ways I'm a little bit more restless than she is,
Uh-huh.
so I've had to work at that. I think she would say, I hope she would say that, that, I think it's important to be kind to people, and I appreciate kindness. I think she'd say too, I'm sensitive. Um, I tend to be a little bit more, just more sensitive, I think. And I have, that's something I've learned from her, to kind of like not take things as personally. Um, you know, um, yeah, I think she would say like I'm definitely like drawn to. I mean, we have a very clear division in some of the TV shows we watch. So she would say like you're definitely more into like sci-fi and that kind of
Uh-huh.
genre and fantasy. You like the fantasy world elements, where she's drawn way more into like indie romantic comedies.
Right.
And she'd be like, I definitely like to cry more than you do. She would probably say that. I'd be like, I completely agree there. You're more comfortable experiencing raw human emotion than I am. Um, I'm more comfortable experiencing raw human emotion if it's through the character of Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing, you know.
Right, right. It has
So
to be couched in that other
yeah,
atmosphere.
um, but I think she would probably say that I love to laugh and love to make people laugh, and we have a good time laughing with each other. And I think that's kind of where definitely we both have a common thing there, right?
Okay. And then if you can do a little something for me for social media. So just like look at the camera and you can say, "Hi, it's Danny Pudi. I just talked to Kara." And whatever strikes you, it's all you.
Right.
Whenever
And
you're
then
ready.
and then and then do I say follow or anything like that, or check us out, or what do I say?
Yeah, you can say something like
Yeah.
that after. That would be good.
Okay. And how where what are the channels, or what's the
Oh, so you don't have to, don't even worry about all that. I'm just going to go on
Okay.
social media. So they already know that I'm
Oh, great.
there.
Great.
So wherever they're watching, they're going to
Let's
see. So
see.
I just want you to
First
have
time
a
I've looked at
natural,
myself, Kara.
you
Oh,
look gorgeous.
oh,
Note,
thank you, Kara.
wait, did you really not look at yourself this whole time? That would be amazing.
I think I did for in the beginning, but now it's
Okay,
just first time in a long time, and then
cool.
which is really that's a feat for me, Kara. I appreciate that.
That's great. Because I did the same thing. I was totally engrossed in what you were saying. So that's a good thing. It's a good sign. I like
Oh,
that.
good. We did it. Okay. Hey, how's it going? I'm Danny Pudi. I just talked to Kara. We had a really good time. I tried not to be self-conscious and stare at my hair or my face. For the most part, it worked out. Anyways, I had a really fun time, and just talking about life.
Drop a comment, leave a like, subscribe, and tap that notifications bell so you're notified every time I drop a new video. Thanks for watching. I'm Kara.